Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me for this lesson on status in groups. Now, as we talk about status, I want you to think about status as being the social ranking of groups or group members within an organization. Now, status can come from a variety of places. It can come from formal hierarchy, it can come from informal relationships. Now, as we start over here on the bottom left, we've got an organization's formal hierarchy. And as you can see, we have top level, mid level, and bottom level within this hierarchy. And as we're looking at status, the person at the top level will have the highest status, people at the mid level will then have the next level of status, and people at the bottom level will have the next level of status. But even within each level of hierarchy, we'll see that status actually kind of changes. So over here on the bottom right, we've got the person in this group that's on the left has the highest status level, the person in the middle has the lowest status level, and the person on the right is somewhere in between. If we move up to the mid level, what you can see is that the person over here on the left is slightly below the person over here on the right. So status can be influenced by both the organizational hierarchy and then informal relationships as well. Now, status characteristic theory tells us that there are three different things that tend to determine status within an organization. The first component that we'll look at is power. Now, for power, we'll look at a basic example here is control over resources. So I use Donald Trump as your example here because love him or hate him, Donald Trump has power within the United States of America. He has the ability to veto legislation that is passed by Congress. He has the ability to allocate resources through executive orders. All of these things are examples of the power that Donald Trump has, and they contribute to his status within the United States of America. Now, next, we're going to move forward to talk about contribution to goals. Now, this basically deals with can the organization succeed without you? And I use LeBron James as the example here because LeBron James has played for the Cavs, he's played for the Heat, and now he plays for the Lakers. And in each of these situations, he's been critical to his team's success. So, for example, when he left the Cavs, their performance went down tremendously. He started with the Lakers in the 2018-2019 season, and his injury highly impacted the team's success. So the idea here is that his teams don't seem to succeed as well without him as they do with him, and because of that, he has status within his organization. And then last, we have characteristics, which basically ask, do I want to be like you? And I've used Dwayne The Rock Johnson as the example here for characteristics because he's obviously pretty good looking, he's charismatic, and as you can tell from this picture here, the man definitely has style. These are all things that we want to identify with as individuals. And the truth is, when The Rock came up in World Wrestling Entertainment, he wasn't really loved by fans. There were a variety of reasons that people didn't like him. They felt like he got a push that he didn't deserve because of his family association and things like that. But because of these characteristics that he has, fans wanted to identify with him. Other wrestlers wanted to identify with him. People wanted to identify with him in general, and his status rose and rose and rose, and he became WWE champion and then moved on from the WWE and became a Hollywood star, and his status has risen since. So now that we know some of the things that contribute to status within the organization, one of the questions that might come up is, well, why does status matter? Now, the first example of where we're going to look at status within the organization has to do with norms. Okay. Now, when we think about norms, people who are high status tend to deviate from norms more than people who are low status. And the example that I used here is from The Simpsons. And if you look at this picture over here on the left, this is a story from a time when Marge here did Homer's laundry, and Homer only wears white shirts. But in this particular instance, their son Bart had thrown his lucky red cap into the laundry. As a result, all of Homer's clothes had turned pink. In this situation, you can see Homer's obviously very upset about having a pink shirt, and Marge says to him, well, it did come out pretty evenly. It's a solid color. Why don't you just wear this to work? And Homer's response is, I can't wear a pink shirt to work. Everybody wears white shirts. That was their norm. And I'm not popular enough to be different. Okay, now as we look over here, you see as they're walking into work, Homer is the only person wearing a pink shirt into work. Everybody else is wearing white. Later on in the episode, he gets called into the office by management. They want to understand why he deviated from the norm, why he wore something different, what he's trying to accomplish, if he's trying to overthrow them, and so on. But the idea is that lower status people don't tend to deviate from norms. Conversely, higher status people may be very likely to deviate from norms. So if you have a very high performing salesperson, somebody who's who's influential on the organization's performance, they may be less likely to turn in certain paperwork that they're supposed to, or to arrive on time, or to follow up with different organizational norms because of their status. Doctors may be reluctant to follow norms that are set by administrators who don't have the same level of education that they do. So as managers, we have to be thinking about, as we understand the status hierarchy within our organizations, how is that going to influence people's conformity to norms, and how are we going to deal with deviations from the norms within the organization that result from differences in status. Okay, so next we're going to move forward here from norms, and we're going to talk about interactions. Okay, and the idea here with interactions is we're looking at a group of people who are all very similar. And in this case, let's say these similar people are all either high status or they're vying for high status. Okay, and the idea here is that they're in their interactions either going to want to demonstrate and justify their status, or they're going to be trying to attain status. So as they're working together, they're going to be more focused on their own individual success than they are on the group dynamic. So one of the ways that we can deal with this in organizations is we can have a little more diversity in our groups, where we can put people who are high status or vying to be high status in with people who are not high status, more mid status, maybe some low status people. And then the idea here is that we may have a little less conflict within the group because there will be less competition for status within the group. Okay, so we're going to move forward from interactions here and talk about inequity within the organization. Now, as we think about our status within our organization, we see people at different levels in the organizational status tend to have shared characteristics. Now, in this case, I've used color to illustrate characteristics, but color obviously doesn't matter here. That's only for visual effect. Let's say, for example, that the people on the bottom level here have lower levels of education and lower experience. Okay, and then the people at the next level here have low levels of education, but they have higher experience. They have more experience than the people on the bottom. Then the people in the next level, they have higher experience, but they also have more education. And then up here at the top, you've got a person who has a lot of experience and a lot of education. Now, when this situation arises in the workplace, the status hierarchy kind of makes sense to everybody, because the people here at the bottom, they understand we're at the bottom because we don't have experience and we don't have education. And as we get experience, we're going to end up moving to this next level. And if we're at this next level and we want to move up one more, we have to get some education. And then as those traits move up, we have the potential to get to the highest status level. Okay, where the challenge comes in terms of equity is when someone who has characteristics of a lower status level ends up becoming in a higher status level person. So in this example, we have somebody who is low on experience and low on education at one of the higher status levels. And that may not make a whole lot of sense to the people down here who don't understand how this person who has less experience and or the same experience and the same education as them has moved up. And if we draw back on what we know about equity theory, this can create some motivational problems within the organization. Next, we're going to move forward to stigmatization. The idea here is that managers tend to have different statuses. Okay, we tend to look at leaders and identify their status based upon the people that they lead. So if you're thinking about a leader, you're thinking about a manager, you're thinking about somebody in a professional organization where they manage people who have to have a high level of education, there's a certain status that you associate that with. And I can say myself, when I talk to people about my industry experience and how many people I've managed and my accomplishments in industry, there's a status that's associated with that. But all of a sudden, when they say, what industry were you in? And I tell them that I was in the retail industry, the fact that I managed people that didn't have to have high levels of education all of a sudden seems to influence how they perceive my status. And we have to be careful about this because, this stigmatization can lead us to making some generalizations that don't quite make sense. Now, even though in this example, the managers on the left may be managing people who had to have higher levels of education than the managers on the right might be, the managers on the right are still responsible for managing hundreds of employees. They're responsible for millions of dollars in inventory, tens of millions of dollars in sales. They're responsible for 50 to 80,000 SKUs. These are very complex positions over here, and if we tend to stigmatize people based upon the characteristics that are required for their subordinates, we may not actually realize their true value. And finally, we're going to talk about group status. And the idea here when we talk about group status is that different groups within an organization are vying for status within the organization. I used the example of the medical field over here in this example. And what we can see are we have different units. We have intensive care, we have the emergency department, we have med surg, labor and delivery, and oncology. And they're all vying for status within the organization. Now, one of these groups may be perceived as having higher status than the others. And in the beginning, that group may not worry too much about what their status is because they're in the position of high status and they're happy with that. But as the other groups, take aim and do different things to be competitive and vie for this status, the group that is originally perceived as being high status may also become competitive because they want to maintain their place in that status hierarchy. As this happens, we have polarization within the organization and then competition between units that can really serve to break down teamwork. So as managers, we want to be cognizant of this and figure out how do we deal with the fact that different groups within our organization are all vying for that same status. How do we make them feel valued so that instead of competing for this status, they find ways to cooperate.